You're listening to ThunderQuack Podcast Network.
Hello there, and welcome back to Force Perspectives. I am your host, Michael Cohen, and joining me, as always, the Huyang to my Ahsoka, Joe Hogan.
That's the nicest thing you've ever called me. And you've called me a lot of nice things.
You might be right. You might be right. Listen, Joe. We don't have any time for pleasantries on this episode. Okay.
I'm so sorry.
We got so much ground to cover, and Lucasfilm and Disney threw us a curveball this morning. Thankfully this morning and not tomorrow. Although I expect we're on the precipice of a deluge of Skeleton Crew news, but we did get some actual word on Skeleton Crew. But before we we have some actual news on this show. We're gonna rank live action Star Wars, like the duels, like lightsaber duels and stuff like that, for all of the live action shows. In this episode, it's actually going to be split into two parts. So in the first half, we're going to cover Mando and Ahsoka, and then in the second half, we're going to cover all of the stuff from Acolyte, and we're going to have a definitive ranking of all of the lightsaber duels thus far in live action Star Wars. But let's talk about Skeleton Crew really quick. So the biggest piece of news right off the bat is that we have a date for the show finally. It's only about a year late, and that date is December 3rd, 2024. I say a year late because I saw the trailer for this show at Star Wars Celebration in 2022, and so honestly, the expectation at that point in time, obviously, Obi-Wan had just started. So we had that. And then what did we go from? We went from Obi-Wan. Did we go from Obi-Wan into Andor? Is that the order?
I think so, yeah.
That went? And then I think the expectation at that point in time was that we might be getting Ahsoka or Skeleton Crew next. Because we saw so much of both of those at Celebration, and we ended up getting Mando season 3 next. Like there was nothing throughout winter once Rogue One Andor was done, which I mean Andor ran for a little while longer than because it's 12 episodes instead of 8 or 10. So it's a little bit longer than some of the other shows. I mean, Obi-Wan is only 6 episodes, right? So we got Mando, and then we got Ahsoka, but we got Ahsoka way later than we thought we would. Like the expectation the whole time was that we would be getting Skeleton Crew sometime like November, December of last year. But then Ahsoka, I think, like crept into that November spot. And then out of nowhere they're like, yeah, Acolyte's the next thing. And now we're finally getting Skeleton Crew. I think what happened was the strikes really sort of shuffled everything. When that all started, I think that Lucasfilm and Disney kind of went, can we push one of these shows? Can we move some of this stuff around? And I think that the deal is that Skeleton Crew is basically filling a gap where had they released everything on the timeline that I think that they originally planned, there just would have been nothing from like fall of this year until probably like late 2025, if not 2026. I don't know. They're shooting Ahsoka season 2 right now, right? Or they've finished.
I don't know. I didn't even realize we were
I
that
don't.
close to
I
it.
think like they're working on Ahsoka season 2. That I think will be the next thing after Skeleton Crew. Um, but yeah, I don't. Yeah, I did. On January 9th, 2024, the second season was announced to be in development. So yeah, like they might not actually be shooting this yet. Yeah. Because we're not getting more Mando on TV, as far as we know, because the next Mando story will be Mandalorian and Grogu, which is May 2026. So unless there's something that Disney has up their sleeve that we don't know about, that we're going to find out at D23, find out about at D23, then yeah, I don't know. I don't know, man. It's weird. We're because of the writer's strike. I think we're in a bit of a funny spot, right? Because I think like that definitely pushed Ahsoka a little bit. But I guess we've got Andor season 2 coming in 2025, right? We know that because that they are shooting right now. They may have actually just wrapped. That might be what I'm thinking of. So we've got Andor season 2 coming next year, possibly Ahsoka season 2 coming next year, maybe early 2026. I'm
Also,
sure we get
maybe
Ahsoka season 2 before Mando and Grogu.
and also possibly something animated might be starting next year.
Oh, certainly something animated, right? Like guaranteed we're gonna get something animated. But this is the thing: they don't consider that in these schedules. If you look at it, it's like there's often overlap with the animated stuff. There wasn't this year, but yeah, we had Bad Batch season 2 and Mando season
Wasn't
3 were
there?
literally
Was
at
it?
the same time.
Yeah, but I also really there was nothing overlapping Bad Batch this year.
Nothing Star Wars, I don't think.
Okay.
Yeah, and we went
I don't know
straight
why
from Bad Batch
I
into
thought in
X-Men,
Ahsoka
or
we're touching each other.
no, I don't think so. No, because
Okay.
Ahsoka was all during the strike, right? And
Right.
Bad Batch was clear of the strike. We
Okay.
recorded and released all of our Bad Batch episodes
Right, that's true. Okay.
as
Yes,
they were
yes, yes.
happening, right?
That is correct.
You
Yes.
might just be, you know what you're thinking of, because we
I'm
had
probably
early
thinking of the
access.
previous year. Oh, right.
Because we had
Okay.
screeners, so
That's
we had
right.
screeners while Ahsoka was possibly still on, or maybe like right after Ahsoka finished.
I don't remember, but
Yeah, because we got those screeners really early for season 3. But yeah, let's talk about Skeleton Crew though. Let's talk about what we've seen so far. So, what I now okay. I've seen a trailer, so I've actually seen quite a bit more because I saw the
okay.
trailer at Celebration 2 years ago. But what we got today was what is it? It's 5 or 6. I think it's 6 stills, images from the series. They're over on People Magazine's website of all things. Is it still a magazine, or is it just a website now?
I,
Do they make magazines? Do they print things on paper anymore? They've got the exclusive though somehow. On Skeleton Crew, and so we've seen a bunch of new images. I to be honest, there's not a lot in here in these images that we haven't already sort of been privy to through leaks and that sort of thing. Or if you were at Celebration for that panel, then you've seen basically all of this already. But the great thing about having the official images now is that we get to take a deeper look at them and get some real detail. And one of the things that I am just ecstatic about is that we have basically like the bicycle equivalent of speeder bikes in these images, and I everybody's new favorite character, the main character of Star Wars for the week, Neil, who appears to be possibly an Ortolan, which is the same species as Max Rebo, but we'll talk about that in a second.
I believe that's confirmed, actually.
Is it confirmed?
I believe so, yeah.
and I his little speeder, he's got tassels on the handlebars, which is very, because he's a kid, and I this is not something I knew I needed in Star Wars until I saw it, but now that it's there, we can't go back, right? There's even like baskets on the front of there, so it's great because in Book of Boba Fett we got the Vespas, right? Like we got the scooter gang, I with their colorful Vespa speeder bikes, and now we're getting basically like some sick two-wheelers, very like 1960s styled, like very Stand By Me coded, if if that makes sense to folks. But yeah, like this show is essentially like Stand By Me, Goonies, like that whole sort of genre of kids on an adventure, from the 80s, but set in Star Wars. And the show is executive produced, show run by John Watts, who made the Spider-Man movies. It's the reason why he's not making Fantastic Four, is because he's been working on this, because he was supposed to direct Fantastic Four, but they swapped him out for Matt Shackman, who was the showrunner on WandaVision. So but that's a different podcast. That's not this podcast. But yeah, like he's been working on Skeleton Crew, um, which I don't know if they've actually been working on it this whole time, or if it's been done and they've just been sitting on it, right? Because like I said, like it seemed like it was pretty close to coming out, until the strikes happened, and then everything, I think, like shifted. Um, Actually, even before the strikes, it seemed like it was close to coming out, and then we didn't hear anything about it. But yeah, how are you feeling about what you're seeing so far for Skeleton Crew?
I mean, I did not see the trailer.
Yeah,
So for me, all I've seen is, the leaked artwork, the Lego set, and these stills that released today. I mean, look, I always go into Star Wars with no expectations, and just to, not get my hopes too high. Um, in general, I am not the biggest fan of child actors. So the idea that the show is essentially going to be carried by them makes me a little bit nervous. But I like the Goonies. I like Stranger Things. When the kid actor cast is strong and the chemistry is awesome, like cool. I'm all in, no problem. But like kid actors in general, I feel like are very hit or miss, and that's not to say that they suck and should give up. I just think it's a lot harder for a kid to kind of nail it and nail that chemistry than it is for someone who is, older and has more experience. Um, but all that to say, I'm looking. It's more Star Wars, right? So I'm looking forward to it. But I think a little bit more cautiously guarded this time, because you know some of them are hit or miss, even in Star Wars. And like, I love Jake Lloyd. I think he gets a bad rap, but I also don't think he did a phenomenal job in Phantom Menace. I don't really think the twin actresses in Acolyte did a great job. Young Asha and May, like they felt really stiff to me. So I am anxious to like not commit to, because like I'm gonna watch it's Star Wars. I'm gonna watch it, but like I'm just worried that it won't. It has a little bit more of an uphill battle, in my opinion.
sure,
Um,
yeah, yeah.
but unless the cast is amazing and clicks really well, then just like Stranger Things and Goonies, like I'm sure it will be a pleasure to watch. But right now I'm cautiously optimistic. That's where I'm at right now.
Yeah, I think I would feel similarly if not for the fact that it's John Watts, because I think that component, um, I think he's very good at the. I mean, like the Spider-Man movies have been very much compared to like a John Hughes sort of
Sure.
vibe, right?
Mm.
And this is obviously a much younger cast than the Spider-Man stuff, but it's still tonally, I think, very similar.
Mm.
Which, like, and the reason why I think that that's really important for this one in particular is that with both instances, you're working with like an established genre franchise that has a lot of rules that you have to play by, but you also want to get that vibe into it,
Mm.
right? And when I look at these images and stuff, like I instantly get the sort of that like Goonies adventures in babysitting, like just that the the vibe of the 80s and even a little bit of the early 90s before kids movies started to get really sanitized, right?
Mm.
Before all of like the special interest groups and like the mom groups and stuff started protesting things left, right, and center. And um kids stories were dangerous, right?
Mm.
Like children were actually in peril, like adults were threatening to murder children, right? And I think we're gonna get at least like maybe not quite as intense as the Goonies, or Adventures in Babysitting is another good example of one that like those kids feel like they're in real danger a couple of times. um but I think that like that thematically will definitely hold true, and so we'll have the suspense that we need, but also like I expect that as a director, or a showrunner, that he's considering that a lot as well. I think it's different when you have a kid coming into an ensemble cast that has to like keep up with the adults, and there are very few kid actors that can do it, and oftentimes they get labeled as weird or creepy, like Haley Joel Osment or like Dakota Fanning, like that sort of thing, where people are like, this is weird, they're talking like adults, I don't like it. So it is one of those situations where you're kind of screwed no matter what you do. Right,
Mm.
like you get a kid that's a really good performer and everybody just goes after them for being creepy, or you get kids that are like not that great but have a little bit of that charm, and you end up with the attitudes that we get towards like Jake Lloyd and stuff. So it's tough. There's not really a lot of kid actors out there that like really nail it, right? That really hit exactly in the right sweet spot. But it's not to say it's not possible. So yeah, like I think I'm definitely more optimistic than you are. Um
I'm
but
just I'm just neutral. I mean,
yeah,
look,
yeah,
it's
yeah.
Star Wars. I'm gonna find stuff that I'm going to enjoy. I'm sure I'm not gonna like hate the show. I am looking forward to new Star Wars. It's just I am worried about the child like leaning so hard on child actors, but hey, I am more than happy to admit when I'm wrong. So hopefully I get to do that.
Yeah, totally. I think we'll see more. I probably pretty soon. I mean, like by the time that this episode is out, that ship may have already sailed.
Right.
And you guys might be um enjoying the trailer already. Uh, but I but yeah, from everything that I've seen, like it's holding tonally with Mando and Ahsoka.
Mm.
So I guess I would say like take that for what it's worth. Like do with that information as you will. It's definitely more, what I saw was more in line with that. But I would say like almost to a certain degree, like a little bit, like the qualities felt a little bit better than Ahsoka. Maybe actually closer to Obi-Wan, because I would consider like Obi-Wan to be in between where Acolyte and Andor sit, right? Because Acolyte and Andor are like incredibly well made.
Mm.
I like cinematic in every respect, right? You're never like, oh, this is a TV show, right? With those ones. with Obi-Wan, there was a little bit of it was sort of in the in between where you're like, we're working with a TV budget here sometimes, right? Like we're really, limiting certain elements of it. And then with the Mando and Ahsoka, it's very much like I constantly use the reference that they're Mando, especially Mando and Book of Boba Fett, are like Batman 1966, right? Like the old Adam West Batman to me in terms of like what we're shooting for. And obviously it's not, it's not 1960s quality. It's not like an episode of Star Trek or Batman. But in terms of like like the tone, it you get away with a lot more silliness and a lot more of that TV, episodic nature of it, because that's just what they're leaning into. And so I think Skeleton Crew is probably somewhere in the middle.
Mhm.
It's closer to the Obi-Wan thing than it is to Mando, but it's not Andor and Acolyte. So just I think everybody needs to just kind of like set their expectations appropriately on this one. This is not like we're coming off the high of Acolyte for sure, around these parts at least. I know there's a lot of people who think that Acolyte's not good, but those people are dumb, so we don't really care what they think. But I don't expect to go into this show with the level of quality that we got out of Acolyte or Andor, because I don't think I just don't think that tonally that's what they're going for. I think they are meant to be a little bit more TV shows, and this is part of the Mando story, right? Like Skeleton Crew is going to sink into that. One of the things that we know is that Vane from season 3 of Mando, the pirate, the one, the what was he? He's not a Weequay, is he?
I
No,
think so. Yeah.
is he
Oh
a
no!
Weequay?
Wait.
No, he's the other
No,
one.
you're right. Yeah. A
Um,
Nikto.
a Nikto. Yeah, he's
A
a
Nikto.
Nikto.
Yeah.
I the one that spoke a whole bunch in season 3 and then was in the Starfighter and then peeled off and abandoned Swamp Thing, Captain whatever his name was. So we know that that Vane shows up in this story at some point. um the other thing that we're I think that is kind of news with this today is that they're gonna get lost. These kids get lost in like another galaxy, um, which that sounds an awful lot like it's gonna sync up with Ahsoka,
Mm.
and I think that these kids might actually end up being Ahsoka, Sabine, and Hu Yang's ticket home. That might those storylines are going to cross paths. Um, I mean, time's going to tell on this. We have to just sort of wait and see where things go, because we don't have a ton of information, but it's looking good so far. So I'm excited. I'm really excited for December 3rd. I'm I'm all for Star Wars, Stranger Things. I think that that's a great direction to go. Um, but yeah, cool. With that, let's jump into our rankings
Yeah.
of the live action lightsaber duels. So we are starting with Mando, and we have to go all the way into season 2 before we get
Oh.
to a lightsaber duel. But the first one up. So we're basically going through chronologically in terms of like when these aired,
Yeah.
right? And then we're gonna put them into the list and rank them the same as we did. I mean, I think that's essentially what we did
I think so.
with
Yeah.
the other one, right? I
Yeah.
don't remember if we
Film
started
ones.
with episode 1 and went all the way through, but um, yeah. So the first fight with a lightsaber. Not all of these are saber versus saber, by the way. Some of these are saber. Well, I mean, by nature of the era that we're dealing with, mostly Mando, right? A lot of these are like a lightsaber versus something else. But then we get into Acolyte, and that changes. But even in Acolyte, there's quite a bit of saber versus non-saber. So um okay, first off is Ahsoka versus Morgan Elsbeth on Corvus in season 2 of The Mandalorian. So this was our introduction to lightsabers versus Beskar,
Mhm.
right? This is the first time that we saw a lightsaber in contact with Beskar. We'd obviously seen quite a bit of Beskar in action throughout the course of season 1 and season 2 of Mando, and learned that in fact Beskar basically just like deflects blaster bolts. So as long as the kinetic force of the blaster bolt isn't enough to almost kill you, you're basically invulnerable. You're bulletproof, right? But the question was, what happens when Beskar meets a lightsaber? I guess we're kind of skipping over Mando versus Ahsoka, which technically happens because that's the first time that we see Beskar
Yeah.
and a lightsaber make contact. But it's such a short fight. I don't think it really
I don't think it
counts in this list. Yeah,
qualifies as like one of the best ones anyway. So
yeah, for sure. But we get to the end of that episode, we get to Ahsoka versus Morgan, and Morgan's got the Beskar staff. This is when that is introduced, and I don't know. This is a pretty good fight. I
yeah,
mean, we are starting very strong. We're starting
yeah,
very, very strong. And these two are going to have a rematch. And I think one of the big questions when we get there at the end of Ahsoka is which one's better, their first fight or the rematch?
mm.
Because I'm kind of inclined to lean towards their first fight because
Oh, okay.
one of the great that so when we talk about these duels and we rank them, it's not just the choreography, right? It's also the emotional content of it. I mean, to me, that's one of the most important parts. But there's also stylistic stuff going on that is outside of like the fight itself. Um, that speaks to like the homage and reference and that sort of thing. And in this one, we're in this beautiful Japanese garden, essentially, right? On this bridge over a koi pond. So it's very samurai, right? Very samurai. Um, and we've got like the cherry blossoms falling, and I don't know, Matt. Like I love this duel. This is probably one of my favorites from the live action TV shows. What? How about you? How do you feel about this fight?
Yeah, it's pretty up there for me. I actually have this on my wall because it's my favorite Adam Schickling illustration ever is just the like a portrait of live action Rosario Ahsoka, and then underneath it's her versus Morgan Elsbeth from this episode. I love the episode. I love this fight. It's really good, man. And it was like I am always really interested to see Jedi or force sensitive people versus non force sensitive people. And like
Yeah,
when someone who's not force sensitive can hold their own against someone who is, I'm just like, what a badass. Like I love watching that. So
absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah,
this is a great fight.
but hey, here's the thing: retcon it. She's a Night Sister,
Yeah.
so
Well,
she
she
is
was a
force
night sister
sensitive,
then.
right?
She was always even back
Sure,
then. They were
sure.
like, "Oh yeah, she's a night sister." And I remember
Yeah, yeah,
being like, "She doesn't look like a night sister." I mean, she's wearing red a little bit,
yeah,
but like, and
yeah,
she
yeah,
has the little marking on her forehead, but past that, doesn't really look like one. But yeah, to actually kind of sort of force sensitive, and then
yeah.
she gets
I get
her
what you're saying.
superpowers later.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay, cool. Well, I mean, for now, because it is the first one, it is ranked in the number one spot.
Hmm.
So let's see how long it can stay there. Actually, I think like well, probably for a little while. But uh, next up in the order is Mando versus Gideon. So this is on the Imperial cruiser, right? And this is our first time seeing the dark saber in action, in live action. Obviously we got the debut of it at the end of season 1, but that was just a just a tease, right? Um, but yeah, we Mando's got the staff. He's got the Beskar pike, and then Gideon's got the dark saber. And every time I think about this fight, the thing that's most interesting to me is that like Gideon with the lightsaber, with the dark saber, not that interesting. honestly. Like his choreography is fine, but where this duel shines is Din, right? The way that he uses that staff is incredible. I think of the part where he's like, he kind of like slams it down, and then he puts his foot behind, like sort of in front of it, and then like kicks it around at Gideon. And it's like there was a lot of like really cool stuff where we're like, okay, like Din's done some pretty cool stuff so far in the Mandalorian, but then we get this episode and we're like, this dude can fight. Like he is really it's so funny. We always talk about the Mary Sue stuff when we get to like Ray, right? There's all
Mm.
it's conversation. Oh, Ray's a Mary Sue, and then inevitably, it's like, well, if Ray's a Mary Sue, then Luke's a Mary Sue, right? And it's all like the whole thing is dumb because the term Mary Sue has been co-opted for nefarious purposes and all of that sort of thing. But if we really want to talk about the Star Wars character who is the biggest Mary Sue in a very like literal definition, it is Din Djarin. Like this dude, anything he needs to do, anything that Dave and John want Mando to do, he's awesome at. Except talking to girls. That's the only like that. It's really like his only weakness is talking to girls. And if that's not Dave and John's self-insert character, like fanfic character, then I don't know what is, right? Like Din Djarin is one of the biggest badasses in all of Star Wars. Unless a girl is talking to him, in which case he can't get words out. But yeah, I this is a good fight. It's a good fight, but it is pretty brief. I mean, most of these are pretty brief because they're TV show fights.
Mm.
So we're dealing with a 40-minute runtime for most of these
Yeah,
episodes.
there's no Mustafar duel here.
Yeah,
On
yeah,
this list.
but for my money, like short and tight is better than long and arduous, which is how I would describe Mustafar, right?
Yeah,
It's like
sure.
Mustafar has some great stuff in it, but it also is like, come on guys, like settle down. Yeah, I mean it's ranked number 5 in our official rankings, but you can go back and listen to that episode. That duel is obnoxious, right? So I don't know. I tend to lean towards some of the shorter fights as some of my favorites in the entire saga. But when we get to part 2, I'll probably go back on that a little bit. Yeah. So what do we think? Is this above or below Ahsoka versus Morgan?
It's a tough one. It's a tough one, man.
Yeah. For me, it's below.
Yeah, it's cool, but it's not as cool.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, Mando is awesome in that fight. Gideon is all right in that fight. And I compare that to Ahsoka and Morgan. You've got like Ahsoka in live action for the first time in a duel, right? Which is a massive deal for all of us. And then the introduction of Morgan Elsbeth, but Diana Lee Inosanto is like there are not a lot of people who come into Star Wars and are like pretty instantly classic characters. And like Din is definitely one of those characters. I think Gideon is also one of those characters. But the thing about Morgan is that like she's literally in one episode of that season, but she left a real impression. So to me, it's like you got two at like sort of the top of their game in that one versus like, Mando is pretty rad, but Gideon's not that exciting in that duel. This is where we start to get interesting with the definition of what these duels are, because the darksaber really, like, because it's sought after, it really creates a lot of interesting conflict. And so next up is from Book of Boba Fett. We've got Mando versus Paz Vizsla. On the ring world thing. I can't remember what it was called, but
Halo. It's called Halo.
Yeah. Yeah. This fight's pretty good. especially like if I'm gonna give points to Ahsoka for the setting and for sort of like the atmosphere of the fight, we got to give points to this battle, because
Yeah, that's
them
fair.
fighting over the literal abyss of space, um it's pretty rad. Like, the stakes are super high. I remember watching this episode, especially because like we're going through the season of Book of Boba Fett, and then all of a sudden here's a massive left turn into Mando territory, and within that left turn, it was like Paz Vizsla is gonna duel Mando for the darksaber, and we're gonna see if Mando like truly deserves to hold on to it, right? So there's a couple of points where you're like, because I think at one point Paz knocks the darksaber out of his hand, and it's like, are we about to lose the darksaber into space? Like, is it about to tumble off of this thing out into space? There's a lot of tension there, and there's also like there's the tension of Mando falling out into space. I wouldn't have expected him to die under those circumstances, obviously, but at the same time, I like he would have lost the fight, right, and lose the darksaber to Paz Vizsla. So yeah, like there was a lot of tension in this fight. I remember when I watched it, I was like on the edge of my seat with it. So that counts for a lot with me. Also getting to see Paz like fully let loose. So we saw
Yeah.
a little bit from him in season 1 of Mando, but really getting to see him like kind of show us how a heavy Mando fights is I think that's a really, really cool fight. How about you?
Yeah, I really dig this one. I love those Mandalorian like energy shield things that they have on their
Mm-hmm.
gauntlets.
Mm-hmm.
So it was just really cool to see Paz using that and his, I guess, what, a vibro knife? Is that vibro blade? Whatever
Yeah, I
he
think
was
so.
using.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, I mean, I always love a good David versus Goliath story.
yeah,
Um, so this, for me, I was super into it. Um, yeah, it's just another really, really cool one. Like, I really enjoyed it. The stakes felt high. It really was one of those fights. I mean, there's so many fights and action sequences where you're like, well, this person has plot armor. Nothing is going to happen. Nothing is at stake. We know who's going to come out of
yeah,
this on top. And like, it's not like I thought Din would be killed, but like Din losing the darksaber, like you said, was a real possibility because this other guy is a beast and he really wants it, and he's Mandalorian, and he could, you know, if he won it, he would deserve it, and then that would be the end of that.
yeah,
Yeah, I don't know. This was a really, really cool one. I was pretty invested in it, and like you said, just the surprise of like
yeah.
getting this in Book of Boba Fett. So many Book of Boba Fett. I think while I have my problems with it, I think that show gets a bad rap.
Oh,
There
for
was a lot
sure.
of really awesome stuff in that show,
Yeah,
and like, obviously the Din episodes. I mean, everybody likes the Din episodes because it's like, oh, I hear the complaint that the Din episodes are the only good thing in that show, which I think is a little silly. But like, even the people who dislike that show like these episodes and like that fight.
mm-hmm.
So I think it says how good that fight actually is.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, I think like that surprise component of it, the fact that we're
Mm,
like taking the swerve out of Boba Fett's story into Din's story, it sort of like it put us all ill at ease, right? Like, it was like,
yeah.
wait a second, why are we doing this? um and yeah, I mean, like, the rest of that episode is building the N1, right? Like
Mm,
we leave there, and then he goes to Peli, and we build the N1. That's the rest of that episode. But the
mm,
beginning of the episode with like killing all the dudes, and then this fight, it's like, and Din not being able to wield the dark saber, right? Like, because that's the other part of it, is that he has such a hard time with it, fighting the guys in the butcher shop thing, right? That we're like establishing there, this is a problem, right? Like, does he actually deserve to wield the Darksaber? So that was kind of it, we were asked that question at the beginning of that episode, and then we get the answer to it in this fight, which I think is really great storytelling. I think is really smart storytelling. But the question remains: where does it fall in the
I
ranking?
was dreading this part.
Yeah.
Damn, man.
I think this is better
I
than the
don't know.
Gideon fight. I think this is better than the Gideon
It's
fight.
definitely better than the Gideon fight, but I'm struggling if it's better than Ahsoka versus Morgan. That I don't know. I think I'm still Ahsoka versus. I think it's in the middle for now.
Yeah, I think so too.
Okay.
Okay. Mando versus the Praetorians. Okay, this one is not strictly a lightsaber duel, but the Praetorians use lightsaber-esque weapons, right?
Sure.
And Grogu is also involved in this fight, and so there is like this is definitely like a Jedi, like related battle, right? So I think that's why it's on the list here, and I don't know. It feels right. It does feel right in here. This is a pretty cool fight. There is some very cool stuff in here. I think where this one gets a lot of points for me is in having Grogu finally enter the battle, right? Like we're finally at the point where Grogu is not Baby Yoda anymore, right? Like I think in season 2 we learn his name, but everybody still talked about him as Baby Yoda, Baby Yoda, Baby Yoda, right? But I think it was really in this episode where Grogu ceased. I mean, I think it was over the course of season 3 of Mando, but really, like, this one is the one that seals it. Of like, oh, Grogu is a lot more advanced than we've given him credit for because he's nonverbal. We have this sort of ideology that he is baby, right? That he's a like an infant, not even a toddler, right? But when he gets the suit, he gets the his mech armor, right? And has the ability to communicate with the yes and no. Suddenly we discover that, like, oh no, like there's a lot more going on with Grogu than everybody's giving him credit for. Except, like, Ahsoka had already done that. Gideon spoke to him as if he were old enough to understand things, and obviously Luke had they were having full conversations, right, during that training. But all of that is sort of like, it's not subtextual because it's definitely like right there on the surface of the story, but I think that it was sort of treated as, I Din not really understanding and the audience not necessarily understanding yet that Grogu is capable of a lot more. So when he fights these Praetorians and really is like the edge that Din requires in order to defeat them, I think like it's a pretty big deal to me.
Yeah.
So that's where this one gets a lot of points, but I don't think that it's better than any of the other duels that we've got on this list so far.
Yeah, obviously, because it's a kind of a one-sided duel, right? Because only the Praetorians have those melee weapons. But I think you're 100% right, where it's fun to see Grogu not only just like capable and like, instead of being the surprise Hail Mary, like, it's cool to see him in the moment being able to handle himself, and on top of it, he's working in perfect sync with Din, and it's fun to watch the two of them cooperating and fighting together. It was a really big moment. But yeah, as a duel, obviously it falls pretty short.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. I think we are both agreed that it is at the bottom of the rankings right now.
Yeah.
Okay. Bo-Katan versus Gideon. So this is happening simultaneously, and obviously by the end of it, it's one fight, right? But
sure.
But in terms of Bo-Katan in the rematch with Gideon, although we didn't see the first time that these two fought, but but yeah, I mean, did she even really fight him the first time? She kind of just gave up the saber, as we understand it, right?
Mm.
But I we'll call this a rematch anyways, just because I think that's how they treat it. This is a pretty good fight. This is pretty cool. Gideon's got the advantage here with the mechanized dark trooper.
Mm.
I don't even know what we call that armor, right? But like Gideon's armor, which is like half dark trooper, half Mandalorian,
Right.
right?
Because it is Beskar, right? So.
Yeah, it's Beskar, but then like it's mechanically assisted,
Yeah, the strength of a
which
dark trooper.
yeah. So I mean, like he's a juggernaut in this fight. Like it seems through most of it that you're kind of like asking the question, like, how are they going to do this? How are they
Yeah.
going to beat him? And the answer is you drop a Star Destroyer on him, but I very Force Unleashed of them.
Yeah.
But I
Pull it out of the sky.
yeah.
I don't know if you've heard that 1,000 times like I did, but playing that game.
But I in terms of a one-on-one and a duel, I mean, like I think Bo-Katan is awesome in this fight.
Mm-hmm.
With the darksaber. This fight is also the death of the darksaber, though. So
Yeah.
she loses it and he destroys it. Or I mean, like presumably, right? Like because they recover it at the end, don't they? Or is it fully destroyed when
I don't remember.
the
Let's.
facility is destroyed?
I've been
I
pulling them
just
up.
watched it.
I've
But,
been pulling them up as we've been talking about them.
hmm.
I want because like I feel like the only place we would see it is in the armory, right? But I don't think it's here. So, yeah, I'm not seeing it.
Yeah, I don't remember if anybody picks it up at the end of that fight, but
Yes, that might be it.
it does get destroyed, or at least like incapacitated.
Mm-hmm.
Gideon crushes it, so it no longer works. I don't know. This is a good fight. It's fun, but I think one of the things is that like it is very much it's simultaneous with the Praetorian thing. It's simultaneous with the rest of the
Yeah.
Mandalorians fighting
Yeah.
the Imperial commandos, right? Like the Imperial Mandalorian troopers. So it doesn't really stand on its own. And I think that if you pulled it out on its own, it's very brief and not a lot really happens in it. But Bo-Katan's pretty rad. I mean, like I think one of the things is that we kind of cut out some of the other Bo-Katan stuff, fighting axe wolves, fighting the spider droid monster thing on Mandalore, and I by virtue of that, it's like I kind of roll all of those into this, and treat it as like the culmination of all of that of getting to see Bo-Katan wield the darksaber.
Mm.
But I don't know. It's definitely above the Praetorian fight.
Yeah.
Is it above Mando versus Gideon? I don't think the choreography
I
is as good as Mando versus Gideon.
see. I don't know if the choreography. It feels like to me though. It feels like the stakes are higher in this one, just because
Yeah.
we know from the one of Din versus Gideon that Gideon is a very capable fighter.
Mm-hmm.
On top of having extra help and like losing the darksaber, it's like, oh, this is not going well.
Yeah,
It's like
yeah.
I felt a lot more tense watching that because I really felt like, okay, yeah, Bo-Katan could be killed here. I'm glad she wasn't. I don't know.
Hmm.
Like I
No, you've
definitely kind
convinced
of
me. Yeah,
believed this one a little bit more. Yeah.
you convinced me. So is it better than, by virtue of the fact that the darksaber is destroyed
Yeah.
and the fate of Mandalore is sort of resting on this? And honestly, the rest of the galaxy as well, right? Because if they don't stop Gideon here, who's to say that they stop him later, right? Um, is it better than the Mando versus Paz fight?
I don't think so.
No. Okay.
I think I was a little more invested, even though the stakes are higher
Yeah.
in this one than Mando and Paz. I just think Mando and Paz have too many cool points going for it.
Totally. Okay. All right. That gets us through Mando and Book of Boba Fett. We're now into Ahsoka. We're gonna get a lot more saber on saber action going on here, and we start with Sabine versus Shin on Lothal. We got a lot of rematches in Ahsoka in this series. There's a lot of like we fight and then we fight again. Not all of the duels are going to be in here because some of them are very brief. But this one, because of the importance of Sabine learning the lesson, I think it's got to be in there. So Sabine versus Shin on Lothal. How do you feel about this duel?
I it's funny thinking about how I feel about this duel made me realize that we're missing a lot of duels. We don't have any Obi-Wan Kenobi duels on here.
Oh my god, we missed all of the Obi-Wan stuff. Okay, yeah, you know what? So Obi-Wan is gonna have to. It'll go after Ahsoka.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, that'll be part 2. Part 2 will be all the bangers,
we'll
guys. It's gonna be
Obi-Wan.
Yeah, you're right.
But that reminds me.
Yeah.
But yeah, so the thing that I really dislike about this duel is something that I really dislike that also happens in Obi-Wan and just in general in Star Wars. People receive horrible injuries and are fine.
Yeah.
Like Sabine gets stabbed through her stomach and then is still fighting. Like, come on, man. But no. It's just I don't know. That really bothers me. And also it was the same kind of thing where the stakes were so low because like they're not gonna kill Sabine. It's the first episode. They're not gonna kill Sabine. Shin's not gonna die. It's just one of those things where when I'm being a cynical jerk about it, it really like ruins it. Choreography's fine. But it was also like I spent most of this duel still not understanding if Sabine was supposed to be force sensitive or not. And like honestly, it was so distracting for me that I was just more than anything, I was thinking about that more than I was really into the fight. So that said, objectively, choreographed, it's really great. Like it's exciting to watch. It's really well shot. But I think it has too many things going against it that this is just not a very particularly interesting duel for me.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm it's funny when I listen to you talk about stuff like this. What I hear is that you're your own worst enemy when it comes to like you enjoying Star Wars.
Yeah,
but
for sure.
I that's a whole other conversation that we can save for a different episode.
That's after I have some therapy. Maybe that'll change.
Yeah. This fight, I really, it's funny. I'm the opposite. Like I kind of agree with you, but I'm also of the opposite opinion that I think that this duel really kind of like sets the stage for Sabine's journey. And the thing is that I think this is one of the larger problems with Star Wars, with the way that a lot of people watch Star Wars in general. This isn't like a you criticism. This is just, I think like it's not, I don't think this is on you. It's not a personality thing. It's not an intellectual thing. I think that this is literally the way that we've been trained to watch television shows and movies now, is that we're supposed to be looking for the inconsistencies in the lore, as opposed to, accounting for the genre that we're in, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Star Wars gets categorized a lot of the time because of the visual language is science fiction, but the storytelling language is fantasy, right? And because of that, like stuff that we would absolutely be fine with in a fantasy setting, we get all bent out of shape about in Star Wars, right? And people start arguing about the size of a Star Destroyer. You know what I mean? It's when it's like, who cares, right? Because like people will literally argue about like, you know, that the Star Destroyers in A New Hope versus the Star Destroyers in Return of the Jedi versus the Star Destroyers in Rogue One, they're different sizes. So those are all different classes of Star Destroyer. So we need to think about that when we think about how good those starship battles are. And it's like, do we? I actually don't think any of that matters at all. I think the reality is that when they were making shit in 1980, they really weren't worrying too much about, you know, like, is this the correct size of these capital ships? Because, like, if you look at the Battle of Endor, which is, we have not ranked space battles, I will tell you right now, it's number one. The Battle of Endor is the best, and it'll never be outdone. That said, it's wildly inconsistent across the board, like in terms of scale, and you know, like this ship and that ship. TIE fighters just pop in out of nowhere half of the time. There are literal tennis shoes flying through at one point. Like the Battle of Endor is an absolute gong show, but it is still like it mythically it is everything we need it to be, and kinetically it's everything we need it to be, and that's all that matters at the end of the day. You get that music in there, you get Lando and Nine Numb, and we're done. Like that's it. Like hey, let's fly inside a Death Star, guys. So I think like that attitude that I have with that needs to be, I think people need to like bring that over to the lightsaber stuff, because I think that the problem is that the more we see lightsabers, the more we're going to see things that we think are inconsistent. But honestly, now at this point, I think what we can say is that if you get stabbed through the stomach with a lightsaber, you'll probably be all right. You'll actually probably be okay.
Oh, that actually really bothers me though, because like it's the fear and respect that I have for that weapon is just like jeopardized a little bit every time something like that happens. Especially in oh dude, but like the worst offenses in Obi-Wan, where he's like swinging it like a baseball bat instead of slicing through that stormtrooper, he like nerf bats him 4 times before he dies.
Sure.
That really bums me out. Like it bums me out that that's what the lightsaber is turning into.
I mean, it here. This is the thing. There are 2 aspects to this. We'll talk about that when we get to Obi-Wan. What is a lightsaber? Like they've kind of, because of the visuals, have taken on this different thing. Star Wars Rebels gets at it by going back to what the original concept art looked like. These are supposed to be like rapiers. They're supposed to be like, originally they were like thin and more like, that was supposed to be sort of the fighting style, right? And that's what we see in A New Hope. And obviously technology prohibited a lot of those things, but throughout the original trilogy, that the way that they fought with lightsabers was so much more in line with that. And when you understand why it's that, because I think that they've kind of become katanas. And within Western storytelling, because this is not the way that katanas are treated in Eastern storytelling, within Western storytelling, katanas have become like it's the one-shot weapon, right? Like because there are a few samurai stories where like the duel is like one move, right? And it's like, okay, but there's like a mythic importance to that in those stories. And then that gets misappropriated, culturally appropriated, honestly, by white dudes making, you know, what's the Keanu Reeves movie, 47 Ronin or whatever, right? Like making stuff like that, where it's like, we're just going to take a bunch of Asian stuff and give it to a white guy, and they're, you know, unstoppable. And it's
Kill Bill.
So Kill Bill, perfect example, right? Perfect example. And so the I'm going to use a different fairy tale analogy in order to explain what has happened to katanas and what has happened to lightsabers, and that is that they've become vorpal blades, right? If you know what the vorpal blade is, which I think the vorpal blade's from Alice in Wonderland, from Through the Looking Glass, right? It's from one of the stories. It's Snicker Snack. It like cuts through anything, right? Like it's unstoppable. And the more Star Wars stories we get, the more we learn that's never been the case, right? Because that's what new stories do, is they retroactively change everything. And so the lightsaber was this thing in the original trilogy that only certain characters used them, although Han picks it up and cuts open a tauntaun, right? But like there were a lot more rules, and then the prequels come along, and in the midst of the prequels, George is like, well, we got to give these Jedi something to fight other than other Jedi, and so we get the Electro staff and all of that, so that we can have some new challenges, right? And then Beskar is introduced, and that changes things, and Kylo Ren and Rey can like stop lightsabers with the Force and hold them in place, and that's rad. And it's like we keep getting new things to the mythology, and as we do, I get where you're coming from, that it's a bummer that like the myth of the lightsaber has kind of diminished over time. But at the same time, like I look at it and I go like, well, if we're going to have them in all of these stories, if we're like, they can't just be the solution to every problem, right?
Mhm.
Like, because I think that there was a little bit of like an upswing towards that, because it's like you start with them in A New Hope, and Luke never even uses his in A New Hope for anything meaningful. He just swings it around for a second. Obi-Wan and Vader fight, and it's very like low key, right? And it's more about the conversation than it is about the choreography. You get to Empire, and the lightsaber is a little bit more intimidating. Luke cuts the ghost Vader's head off, and then gets his own hand cut off with it. So we go, okay, these things are like, and again, Han opens the tauntaun with it, so it's like okay, these things are scary. They'll cut through almost anything. And then in Return of the Jedi, Luke is deflecting blaster bolts with it, right? Which like that's the first time that we see that.
Mhm.
Not effectively, but he is doing it defensively, right? And then we get to the prequels, and in the prequels, it's like now all of a sudden these things like these Jedi can just like every bolt goes back to the battle droid it came from, and they kind of build it, through Phantom Menace, and they got to like this fever pitch with Phantom Menace, I think. And then I think George like recognized that partway through making Attack of the Clones, and went like, you know what, I gotta like depower these things a little bit. I gotta put some things into the galaxy that can combat a lightsaber, because otherwise the Clone Wars would be over in a week.
Yeah.
You just get a bunch of Jedi to run in, and they just throw their lightsabers with the Force, and any battle droid army is done, right? I think you actually see a lot of that thinking happen by virtue of the Gendy Clone Wars, where he goes like,
Yeah.
I think I've painted these Jedi as too powerful. Because this guy thinks that this is how they operate. And it's like, yeah. So I think there's been a lot of work to like pull the Jedi back, pull the lightsabers back over time. And then I think you get into this, and I think you get from Dave's perspective. Obviously, it's like does the lightsaber kill the person? Well, that depends. Does the person need to die in the story? Right?
Right.
Because Sabine getting that wound is important mythically for her journey. So it's like it's a different circumstance, and it's honestly it's the same when we get to oh my god, her name just fell out of my head. In Obi-Wan, right, when she gets stabbed as well.
Reva.
Yeah, Reva. Thank you. I couldn't think anything other than Indara. I like when that happens. Um, it's like in both instances, like those characters need to survive those moments in order for other important things to happen in the story. And it's a death with a rebirth, right? The same as Kylo Ren, death and rebirth, right? Like, so they don't actually have to die in order to die mythically, in order to be reborn as a new character on a new path, right? So um I look at it, it's like I think that in terms of the story, it's actually super important that happens. But I look at it, I was making the point a minute ago that like you look at the inspiration of the lightsabers and why they're in Star Wars. They're in Star Wars. Yes, there's the samurai stuff. I think people have run with that too much. The original reason why they're in Star Wars is because they're in Robin Hood, like because of Errol Flynn, right? Like that's the cinematic inspiration that actually goes on to be the reason why we get sword fights in Flash Gordon in those serials, right? Which is ultimately where George Lucas is taking a lot of this stuff from. But like that's like the lightsaber duels were originally meant to evoke more of that, which is why we have like literal references to it in Revenge of the Sith when they're swinging on the like the thing as it's falling apart or whatever, and they've got the ropes and they have the clash. That's like that is a direct homage to Errol Flynn in Robin Hood, right? So like that's sort of how what they've always not always been meant to be because it's changed over time and it's evolved, but that's the original inspiration. And in those stories, characters get stabbed through the stomach with a rapier all the time, right? And like they don't die necessarily, right? Again, it's whether or not it's important for the story. So to me, like I look at it, like if you want to be clear about killing somebody with a lightsaber, I think a slash is much more clear than a stab ever is. Now there are some stabs that are very clear, the ones that come through the back, like up the chest through the heart sort of thing. It's like, okay, that's super clear. But yeah, like I don't know, lower abdomen. Also, I you just got to learn how to take a stab. So
I'll start working on it now.
Yeah. Okay, where do we put this in the ranking? Where do we put this in the ranking?
I mean, it's low for me, so I'm gonna let you take point on it, on where you want to throw it.
I put it above the Praetorians, but below Gideon.
Okay, that's fair.
Okay. That's funny. That it took us an hour really to get into the episode before we got off on a wild tangent. And I didn't expect it to be Sabine versus Shin, but there it is. Okay, so we're skipping over a bunch now to get to this one, but Ahsoka versus Merrick on Cetos. So they had an initial battle on Corellia, but it is pretty brief. It's mostly Merrick throwing a lightsaber, and then running off. But we get the rematch in the forest on Cetos. This is a pretty cool fight. This is where like we got the samurai stuff coming back in, right? And I think like to contradict what I just said, it's like contextually, I think it's like character to character, right? Because when we talk about the next fight, I'm gonna get into that even more. Like different characters wield their lightsabers differently, and there are different influences, and one of the great things about the lightsaber is because of its sort of ghostly ethereal nature, being a plasma beam, right? It can become anything, right? So when Ahsoka wields them, they are absolutely a katana and what's the small one? It's something with a T.
Wakatashi.
Is it Wakatashi? Okay.
Wakazashi, I think.
Wakazashi, yeah. So like the Shoto style, right? Like she's got those two sabers. It doesn't get much cooler, honestly. Like in terms of like lightsaber style, I think that Ahsoka wins out over everybody. If you take like the entirety of it, right, from all of Clone Wars, all of Rebels, all of Ahsoka, I think that she, like, if anybody makes a lightsaber look the coolest, I think it's Ahsoka Tano. But Merrick with the Inquisitor blades here, he doesn't really put up much of a fight in this rematch, right?
Yeah. He gets put down pretty easy. But we do get the awesome samurai moment of this is what I'm talking about. The slash is so clearly communicated what that is, and then he literally, like, he kind of just
deflates, right?
Yeah.
Like the the
Literally.
joke, the joke of my toaster's broken. It's like, well, did the black smoke come out of it? It's like, yeah, the black smoke came out of it. Well, once that black smoke gets out of your toaster, your toaster's broken. It'll never work again. And it's like, I think I made that joke when we were talking about Ahsoka. It's like, yeah, the black smoke, if you get the black smoke, that toaster is garbage. You just throw that away. I don't know if anybody else understands that joke, but I think it's very funny. I
don't even get it. It's like
the joke is that obviously when black smoke comes out of your toaster, it's because you're operating your toaster ineffectually or improperly.
Okay, so it's just
you've
dead.
put something into it, and you like it's shorted out, it's caught on fire or whatever, and then there's smoke. But the joke is that the idea is that the black smoke is contained somewhere inside the toaster as part of its function, and it's like, well, if it breaks and the black smoke gets out, then it'll never work again because you'll never get the black smoke back into it. That's the joke, and I don't know the origin of that. I don't know where I got that from. It's from something, but it's like a very dad joke, because it's like I think it's like it's mostly in reference to like cartoons. I think like it is meant to be sort of that, because it's like that's a very clear communication in a cartoon of like the walkie-talkie, there's black smoke coming out of it. It's like, the walkie-talkie's done then, right? There's black smoke coming out of the front of the car. It's done. The car's done. It's broken, right? It just very clearly communicates that. So I think that's meant to be the origin of the joke, but it's just a very dad joke that I like to reference, without understanding the reference myself, because I don't remember where I got it from, but I don't know. It's kind of like, it feels kind of like Looney Tunes ish, which is one of the reasons why I love it being used in this, of like the black smoke gets out, and it communicates to us that Merrick is being controlled somehow by Morgan, right? There's some Night Sister magic going on there, but which explains how he's alive, when the rest of the Inquisitors at this point are dead and all of that stuff. But it's just dark side magic. It's just dark side stuff. Sith secrets. Technically Night Sister, but it's a pretty short duel. It is intercut with Sabine versus Shin on Cetos. And so I don't know. I mean, like, I definitely put it above Sabine and Shin on Lothal. Do we put it above Mando versus Gideon?
Nah.
Yeah, I agree. The rematch, Sabine versus Shin on Cetos. Now, I think this is the real focus of this.
Way better fight. Way better.
So this is one where we get to see the lightsaber as well as the Mando gear at the same time.
It's awesome.
And I think Sabine, honestly, I don't know if this is controversial for people, I think Sabine does it better than Bo. I honestly do. And that might be that I have more connection to Sabine than I do to Bo-Katan, but I don't know. What do you think?
What do I think of the fight, or what do I think comparing
just all of it, just everything that I said.
I mean, I am more attached to Bo, but I think I like this fight more than anything Bo had done with the darksaber. Honestly, Sabine is awesome in this one. It's nice to see her playing to her strengths and relying on that Mandalorian side of things. And it's not because I don't want her to be force sensitive, because I do. Like, I was rooting for her the whole time, even though, like, I just don't love that first fight. This was just a lot more. She was a lot more unpredictable, which made the fight more fun to watch for me. And it started to feel like now the stakes are higher because they're chasing after the the map and don't let them get thrown, and they're on their own, and this felt a lot more like I was a lot more invested in this fight. And I think it was choreographed a little bit better too. I think it was, I mean, obviously by design, right? Like you want things to get more exciting as the show goes. But yeah, this one's up there for me.
So I think obviously above Ahsoka versus Merrick, above Mando versus Gideon, I think.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Is it above Bo-Katan versus Gideon?
I think so. For me, it is. I think
so too. I think so too. But I don't think it's better than Paz.
No, I don't think we're beating Paz yet.
And we've still got Ahsoka versus Morgan at number 1
Right.
on Corvus, which is
Right.
wild to me that we're this far
Cool.
into it and that's still the case.
It's cool. I'm glad. I like that.
But
fight, so.
but the next two,
wow.
Ahsoka versus Balin on
Yeah.
Cetos.
It's better than Morgan and Ahsoka.
Yeah, I mean, like, yeah, I think automatically, let's just put it in the ranking at number 1. But let's talk about the fight. Yeah, this is one of the best ones we've gotten in the Disney Plus era of
Period.
lightsaber duels, right? Yeah, this is an awesome fight. As I was talking about before, I was alluding to it. You know, when Ahsoka's got those lightsabers, they are the katana and wakizashi and but when Balin ignites his lightsaber, that thing's a claymore. Like that thing that and it's so funny because it's like the blades are the same size, but the way that he fights and the power with which he wields that lightsaber, obviously very Form 1, very Anakin. It feels like that thing is heavy. It feels like Ahsoka's blades might shatter under it, right?
Yeah.
And I think for that alone, this is one of the best fights because the choreography communicates that, the performances communicate the hell out of it.
Yeah.
And I think if you go back and you listen to our recaps of these episodes, this is the fight that secures Balin as like one of the best characters that's come out of all of these live action shows. And it's also the one that breaks our heart because, you know, we're not going to get more with this actor. Right. Because he just did such an amazing job. Like Ray was so incredible in this role, both in terms of like, just like that, like the actual performance of it, right? Like the character moments are so incredible, but then like, he brought something new to lightsabers that it's one of those things where it's like the speeder bicycles, right? I didn't know that this was missing from Star Wars until we saw it. And then all of a sudden you're like, this has been there the whole time. This is part of it, right? It's some things come in and they just automatically click with what Star Wars is as a whole. And you go like, how have we not been doing something along these lines the whole time? Right. So yeah, I love this fight. And then also just like the emotional content of it. And Ahsoka being defeated by him.
Yeah.
And the bad guys winning in this moment. Like this is a very Empire Strikes Back moment for Ahsoka. And it's going to take a lot for her to come back from it. A lot. Which we're going to talk about in a second. I love this duel so much. Thoughts?
Yeah, no, this duel is, I feel pretty confident this is going to be in our top 3. Period. Something that I really appreciate, you kind of touched on it a little bit. It's not just the choreography, it's the actual performance that Ray Stevenson and I imagine his stunt doubles, if he had stunt doubles, I have no idea. There are so many shots of him doing the fighting, so like I'm pretty confident he really is like in it for the majority of it. But it reminds me of something that I like from Ghostbusters 2, which is really silly. There's a shot in Ghostbusters 2 where, you know, in the courtroom scene, they're fighting the Scoleri brothers, right? And it comes time where they only have one trap, but there's 2 ghosts, so they have to pull the ghosts together. And there's a shot like low to the ground, and you just see Bill Murray kind of like shuffling backwards, like on his heels, like on the heels of his feet. And it's just like the performance that it gives is that, yeah, he's leaning back, despite like in real life, he's got this very heavy proton pack behind him. And yet he still manages to shuffle backwards and make it look like he's putting all of his weight behind him because
Mhm.
he's being pulled by this imaginary tether, an imaginary ghost,
Yeah.
and still sells like, yeah, no, he's leaning back as hard as he can to pull this fat ghost into this ghost trap. And that little nuance, like I always, like I, even since I was a kid, I noticed him doing that, and it made it work and magic for me. And it's
Yeah.
the same thing Ray's doing, where his swings are so heavy that this lightsaber feels like it's like 40 pounds
Yeah.
when he's
Yeah.
swinging this thing around. And it's just, it's his stances, it's the, like the weight he's putting into it, it's his facial expressions, it's his, you know, what he's doing with his arms when he, like before he's swinging, like almost like telegraphing in a lot of these things, because he needs to shift his weight in order to lift this thing.
Yeah.
And it's so like, it's, your brain is picking up on it even if you're not conscientiously like aware of it, and it's so good, it's so awesome.
Well, yeah,
um
and in conjunction with that, Rosario's performance,
yeah.
because like you have to remember that they have like they're swinging LED tubes just like
Right.
we would if we're playing with lightsabers, right?
Mhm.
Like, so that Ray putting the weight into it as Balin, right, is half of the equation, but the other half of the equation is that Rosario as Ahsoka has to pretend
Right.
that he's hitting
Right.
harder than she can,
Yeah.
right? As if he and like that, it makes his lightsaber feel bigger than hers,
Yeah.
even though they are the same size, and she's got two, right?
Mhm.
Like it's wild to me. Does she loses one at one point, doesn't she?
I don't think she uses two in this fight. I think she uses two in the other fight. I think
Maybe
she
she,
just uses
yeah,
the
maybe
one.
she lost one in the fight with Merrick. She loses one at some
Yeah.
point for sure.
Yeah. I think that's during Merrick, and then she has them again later.
Yeah.
um but yeah.
But yeah, like just like the acting from both of them, of like acting with the choreography and using those aspects of the performance in order to sell, you know, that Balin is a beyond a legitimate threat. Like Balin is someone to be scared of.
Mhm.
um yeah, it works so well for me. It's so good, and then on top of it, the story is so good. Everything that's built up to that point, and we're at this, like, this is like the do or die moment, and we kind of know that it's going to go poorly because we know that we got to get to Peridia in order for the story to progress. But at the same time, like, it's you're like, ah, man, like, Ahsoka, dig deeper, right?
Yeah.
But she's got, again, this is along the same lines as the argument that I make with Sabine getting stabbed. These are coming from the same place. We want Ahsoka to dig deeper. We want her to be able to defeat him. And when she fights him again, which we'll talk about in a minute, when she fights him again, she does, right? And nothing has changed. It's not, we didn't get a training montage. She's not bigger and stronger. She doesn't have a better lightsaber all of a sudden, right? She just does. She literally just digs deeper because, like, in terms of the story, Ahsoka is being held back by something at this point in the story, right? And so she has to be defeated. She must die in order to be reborn. Like, it has to happen, right?
Yeah.
So the story is dictating that. And maybe because of the fact that we've had a little bit more time to build up to this, because we have Balin is a much more imposing presence than Shin, so I think, like, there's that as well. And because there isn't a fatal blow, right? Like, I think that changes the conversation a little bit as well. But in terms of story, like Ahsoka has to go through the same thing that Sabine did at the beginning, right?
Mm.
And to me, like, honestly, that's why they're able to come back together at the end of the season in the same place, and you know, like work their nonsense out, right? Because now they've both been through this. They've both died and come back and experienced the other side. Although Ahsoka, what is this number 3 for her, I think. But in any case, I yeah, I think that brings us to the next fight. This next duel. Here's the thing with this one. Emotional content cranked to 11, right?
Yeah.
Choreography, probably around a 7. It's not bad. It's good. Like it's very capable. It's very competent choreography. But this duel, there's not a lot that happens in this duel in terms of like actual lightsaber stuff. And it's obviously it's broken up with a million other things, and that is the fight between Ahsoka and Anakin in the world between worlds. Yeah. On this list, this is potentially the second most important fight in all of them in terms of story, right? But when we account for everything that we're ranking, so like style, choreography, all of that stuff that we bring into these conversations, for me, I love this so much, and this is an emotional high, absolutely. It's like story high, absolutely. Um, but in terms of like best duels in the live action shows, I don't know. I don't know. I honestly don't even know if it ranks above Ahsoka and Morgan on Corvus. What do you think? Where are you at? It's
Oh man.
obviously in that zone, right? Like this is within
Yeah,
the top 3.
it's definitely the upper half, no question.
Yeah. Yeah.
Man, I was so hyped. If I'm putting my hype and my emotions aside, yeah, it's probably just below. It's better than Paz.
Yeah.
Probably just below Morgan and Ahsoka the first time.
Yeah.
But damn, I was standing up. I stood up during this. I was so excited. And like Hayden still got it, man. Like he never lost it.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Um this actually brings up a question for me.
Okay.
Did we skip Luke versus the Dark Troopers? Should that be on this list?
If it is, for me it's number 1. So decide right now if that's, because like that was the moment I've wanted since 1997 to see in live action. Being a huge Dark Forces video games guy, loving when Kyle Katarn and Luke Skywalker joined forces to fight Dark Jedi, like that was, man, my soul was never more alive with Star Wars Disney content than that moment.
It's killing me. We have to put it on here. Luke
I mean,
versus...
for me, it's literally number 1, so I'm gonna defer to your judgment. So
yeah. I mean, like I feel you on that. I do. I can't put it above the Balin fight, for sure.
I respect that. That's entirely my bias.
Yeah.
I think everybody's bias gets one. You know what I mean? Like everybody has their bias, and that one's mine.
Yeah, This is tough. I'm hovering between Ahsoka versus Anakin. Like, is it above Ahsoka versus Anakin or below it? To me. So I'm gonna let you win out on this one. It's in the 3rd spot.
Okay, cool.
It's in the 3rd spot. Okay. Do we have anything else to say about Ahsoka versus Anakin? I mean, like I think we've talked that one to death in other conversations, right? Other episodes.
Yeah, but no, obviously the significance. Oh, you know what I really love about it though too is that it's not just Rosario Ahsoka. I can't think of the young actress's name, who was also awesome as young Ahsoka.
Yeah.
Like she did a great job, even though her part was much shorter. Love that. What a cool, unique fight to have a fight in the world between worlds through like time and space and the
across
Force.
time and space.
What a cool thing. Like honestly, even we were talking about the set piece getting points. This is maybe the best set piece out of everything between the world between worlds, and then in a flashback of the Siege of Mandalore was so awesome.
Yeah, listen. You know what you just did? You just made me change my mind. It's Ahsoka versus Anakin is above Luke and the Dark Troopers.
All right.
Yeah. No, you're right. I mean, like, it's incredible. It's one of those ones that it's like I am almost at a loss for words at this point because I think we've talked about it so much and because we've gushed about it so much and everything around that I'm just like, yeah, man, it's just awesome. Okay, let's move on. Let's get into Ahsoka versus Balin on Peridea. So this is the rematch.
I'm gonna rewatch
Peridea.
it as we're talking about. I'm gonna rewatch it.
It's a very short fight because
Yeah.
Balin pieces out, right? Like because this is where we sort
actually
of get the thing of like,
I think does he piece out or does she piece out? Because I feel like she
maybe she does, yeah.
Because
I think
the others. Sabine and Ezra are a little outnumbered, and Shin shows up, and I feel like Ahsoka leaves to help them.
You're right, because she's got him on the ropes essentially, right? Like she's reborn, she's Ahsoka the White, and
Hu Yang just like kind of split them up with the ship by firing at them, and Ahsoka makes a break for it.
Yeah.
So Balin's ready to keep going. Yeah. And Ahsoka. Yeah.
Okay. I think it's cool. It's great to see Ahsoka come back, and this is Gandalf, showing up at what is it, Helm's Deep or whatever, right? To save the day, but I think it's below. I think it's below Mando versus Gideon.
Let's see. Just kidding. I think it's just above that one for me.
You think it's just above it? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll give it to you.
Because I like the storytelling that it kind of shows in the choreography, just because like Ahsoka is not letting Balin get any of his big swings off.
Yeah.
Like she's so ready for him with everything, and it's just like a cool little storytelling moment where like, yeah, no, she's learned and grown, and now she knows how to handle this guy, and I just really dig that. It's cool to see the power shift change.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, this is our last one for part one, and then we're gonna come back and we're gonna do all the Obi-Wan and Acolyte duels. So Ahsoka versus Morgan Elsbeth on Peridea. This is like the climax of the story, right? This is a cool fight. I love the Night Sister. I don't even know what do we call that, like scimitar. I guess it's kind of like a scimitar, right?
Yeah, because it's curved, right? Like it's
it's got that curved blade to
but
it.
It's not like katana curved. Yeah, I think you're right with scimitar. I think that's probably
but here's the thing, this one kind of let me down. There was a lot of build up to it, there was a lot of setup, and I was very excited, and then within the episode I feel like it kind of gets lost a little bit because there's just so much going on, and I don't know, like it just it kind of fizzles at the end, you know what I mean? I don't really feel like Ahsoka definitively wins anything because I don't really feel like Morgan Elsbeth brings her A game. I don't think that Morgan is as impressive in this fight as she is the first time that we see her on Corvus. Right? Like I thought that fight worked so much better for me than this one. I do still think it's good, and I think that like it, there's a million things going on in this episode in terms of like the action, so you're really splitting your focus, and we have a lot of ground to cover, but it's also not. I think the reason why it does that for me, why it falls short and why it fizzles, is because Morgan, I feel like she deserved a bigger hero moment. I know she's the villain, but I'm just in terms of like the scope of it, like the grandeur of it. But there's also an aspect to that is a little bit heartbreaking because it's like she's done all of this stuff, and then Thrawn's like, "Okay, we're gonna go now. You're gonna stop them.
Yeah,
your sacrifice is noted." And he kind of like, so there's an element there. what will change this for me is when we get to season 2 and we discover that Morgan Elsbeth is not dead, right? That even, having the Star Destroyer collapse the tower wasn't enough to stop her. But yeah, like until we get that, where I sit with it right now, it feels incomplete, right? And I think that part of that is intentional, is what I'm getting at, is that like we're supposed to despise Thrawn in that moment, right? Because Morgan is a character that, especially now that we have Tales of the Empire, we are very sympathetic to, right? Like we're putting a lot of our Asajj and Marin feelings onto this character as well, right? Because we're going like, well, like what's Morgan's goal? Because the Thrawn's goal is to take over the galaxy and bring back the Empire. Morgan is just trying to undo what the Separatists did, what the Sith did to the Night Sisters. She's just trying to bring the Night Sisters back to Dathomir, right? And so like the moment when he says for the Empire, turns around and walks away, and she says for Dathomir, in that moment, she's the main character of that story. Right? And so that duel going the way that it does, and sort of like kind of a bit of a wet fish ending to it, it definitely leaves me wanting more, which is why I will say, like, I really hope that we're not done with that character. Right? And the fact that we got Tales of the Empire makes me feel like Dave is not done with that character. And that there will be more, whether she's a ghost of some sort, and the Mother Talzin came back like 3 times after she was killed.
Exactly.
So we're on Peridea, we're in the seat of their power, right? So,
and Morgan got that like super power up just before this fight. So
she was upgraded to Mother Talzin's status, right? Like what I think what we're expected to understand is that the 3 witches are the most powerful. These are the 3 most powerful Night Sisters, full stop. But that like Mother Talzin was like the tier right below them, right? And when they imbue Morgan Elsbeth, she takes that status, right? So she comes back as a ghost no matter what. Like I think that's a given at this point. It's whether or not she physically survived. That's the question, right? Because I think there's a bit of an aspect that like that the magic kind of breaks towards the end of that fight, if I'm remembering right. But if you've got it pulled up, you can tell me if I'm right or wrong.
I don't remember the magic breaking at any point.
Doesn't she have like, she's got like black eyes, like the blacked over eyes at one point?
But she has them the whole way. Yeah, once she gets that superpower, she's got it until she dies. Yeah, and even so I'm watching her die, and she still has them. So
I don't know why I got that impression that like does the sword go out or something? I can't remember. No. Okay. Then I think she's absolutely still alive.
I hope so.
I think we'll get closure to that. What I would love to see is closure in the way that like Ahsoka and Morgan not necessarily reconcile, but that Ahsoka recognizes in her new form, right? That she's wise enough to recognize that the Night Sisters are not necessarily evil, even though they've been painted that way to her by virtue of the conflict during the Clone Wars. That like she's got a complex relationship with Asajj Ventress. I could see them, sorting it out, and moving forward, and Elspeth becoming redeemed as a character in season 2. I would like to see that, and if that happens, then I think like my opinion of this fight might change a little bit. But as it is right now, there isn't really anything in the choreography. There isn't really anything in terms of the story. It all kind of goes the way that we think it's going to go. To me, I put this below Mando versus Gideon.
Let me pull it back up. Let's see. Oh man, I don't know.
I know it's very low on the list, but The rest of those
No.
fights are pretty good.
I don't know, man. For me, I think it's better than. For me, it's above Ahsoka versus Balin on Peridia.
Okay.
Because it's the same kind of thing, right? Where Ahsoka is now powered up and smarter and has fought before, and even still, she's like Morgan's tossing her around and throwing her around, and like she's not dominating this fight like she was against
Balin.
Against Balin on Peridia.
Yeah.
And like whatever,
Okay.
it doesn't really matter if like it's not like the hero needs to be dominating in order for the fight to be more interesting or whatever. But like watching this fight and the run that for Ahsoka's money she was giving her, I was not convinced. And I mean, I was right when I thought this. I was like, I don't think Ahsoka's gonna make it back in time. I think Ahsoka's gonna get stuck here because of how formidable Morgan is in this form, and it's just cool to see. Literally, the two of them super powered, right? Like Ahsoka is now Gandalf, and she is now Mother Talzin. I don't know. I liked it. I dug the choreography. I liked seeing them kind of like jumping, rolling around, and flipping each other. And I was like, I thought it was really cool. I really liked it.
Okay. You've convinced me. Okay. Well, so that puts us at the end of part 1 of our ranking. So we've got I'll go from the bottom to the top. So at the bottom of the list, we've got Mando versus the Praetorians. We've got Sabine versus Shin on Lothal. After that, Ahsoka versus Merrick on Cetos. After that, Mando versus Gideon from season 2 of The Mandalorian. Ahsoka versus Balin on Peridia. Ahsoka versus Morgan on Peridia. Bo-Katan versus Gideon from the end of season 3 of Mando. Sabine versus Shin on Cetos. Mando versus Paz Vizsla from Book of Boba Fett. Luke versus the Dark Troopers.
I love that that's a duel.
Yeah. Ahsoka awesome. Versus Anakin. Ahsoka versus Morgan on Corvus from Mando season 2. And then at the top of the list, currently in number 1, Ahsoka versus Balin on Cetos.
Well, let me ask you now, because I feel like we need to interject one more then. If we're gonna do Luke versus Dark Troopers, I feel like we need to do the Dark Trooper versus Din. Because like that's another hand-to-hand melee fight. He's using the Beskar spear. I feel like that deserves to be here.
Okay, so Mando versus the Dark Trooper, and then where do you put this? What do you think?
I think it's honestly, I was more afraid for Mando fighting the Dark Trooper than I was for him fighting Gideon in that same episode. So I think it might be above that one for me, because he was just getting his ass kicked by that Dark Trooper.
Yeah, that's the choreography in that Mando versus Gideon fight's really good though.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, that's fair. Okay.
I'll give it to you right underneath that one.
Yeah, that's cool.
Okay.
That's cool.
Okay, cool. So add that into your rankings if you're playing along at home. Okay, that's it for part 1. We'll be back in a week with part 2, where we will go through all of the Obi-Wan and Acolyte duels, and we will add them to this list. And then we will have a definitive list by the time that we are done. A very long list, a lot of duels when we add these Obi-Wan ones in. Awesome. That's it for this episode. Thank you guys for listening. Thank you for supporting us on Patreon, patreon.com/ThunderQuack, if you want to go check that out and get the episode early. Listen, Acolyte's done. We're back to the 1 week delay, you guys. We're back to the 1 week delay, which I didn't think about in terms of like the news. So you guys are going to be hearing the news about Skeleton Crew, if you're not a Patreon supporter, like a week after it happened. But if you're on Patreon, you heard it the day that it happened. So awesome. With that, thank you guys, and we will catch you on the next episode to finish our live action television series Duel rankings. See you then. Follow Force Perspectives on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at ForcePOV, and join us on Discord at thunderquack.com/Discord. Support the show by visiting us at patreon.com/ThunderQuack to get early access to episodes, leave a rating and review on your favorite podcast service, or buy merch at store.thunderquack.com. Force Perspectives is a part of the ThunderQuack Podcast Network.